Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first program of the Technology Association of Oregon's Digital Health Week. We're excited to kick off with a conversation where we'll be exploring current and future applications of artificial intelligence with respect to healthcare data. I'm Skip Newberry, President and CEO of TAO, and I'll be joined today by Riley O'Brien, who's our VP of Experiences and Events at TAO. She's going to be providing some Zoom support and making sure everything goes smoothly today. I'm just going to review a couple rules of engagement before we turn it over here to our esteemed panelists and moderator. All participants have been muted, so please remain on mute unless a TAO staff member calls on you and asks you to talk. You may ask or respond to questions in the chat box, publicly or privately, by directing your message to me or to Riley, who is under the name Special Events. We'll monitor the chat box and respond throughout the discussion. We'll ask you all to engage via the participant icon on your screen. And we also encourage you to please engage with us on social media during this call and throughout the day. We love to share what's happening at TAO and to get participant takeaways from our events. We also encourage you to join us tomorrow and later in the week. We'll have additional programming, and tomorrow we're going to have an international roundtable connecting companies and startups from both Israel and some of the largest healthcare providers here in Oregon. And they'll be discussing some different opportunities as it relates to Oregon's digital health ecosystem, as well as highlighting some of the latest innovations coming out of Israel and their digital health ecosystem. Later in the day, tomorrow we'll also have a session at 11 a.m. With Noah from Evolve Collaborative. And he's going to be talking a bit about human-centered design and some different ways that the methodologies involved with human-centered design can be applied to foster greater digital health innovation. A big thank you today to Link Oregon, Otradi OBI, HIMSS Oregon, Israel Consulate General to the Pacific Northwest, and OCHIN for underwriting our series this week. We appreciate their sponsorship, and we're excited to explore topics related to digital health. Finally, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this conversation, the Director of Life Science Tracks of the Graduate Internship Program at the Knight Campus for Accelerating Scientific Impact with the University of Oregon, Stacey Wagner. Stacey, the floor is yours.
All right, well, thank you, Skip. And that's a bit of a mouthful, so I'd just like to take just a minute to explain what all those affiliations actually mean. So I am working with the University of Oregon in their data science initiative to develop graduate training, and that's for more broad data science training. However, my main focus is really in the Knight campus, which I'm sure you all have heard of. If not, it's a $1 billion initiative for science to advance society. And my main focus there is also through education. And so we're focused on training the next generation of the workforce. So I oversee a career-focused master's track in the Knight Campus Graduate Internship Program, and this track's focused in bioinformatics and genomics. However, we're interested in developing new programming focused around data science in the biomedical area. So this panel will be especially helpful for us in helping inform the next generation of data scientists and figuring out what that impactful training should be. So I want to thank everyone for coming today. And I'd like then our next, for our panelists to then introduce themselves. So let's start with, I'd like to introduce Euan Cameron, who's the CEO and founder of COHESION Medical Group. And Euan, do you want to just say a few words?
Yes, thank you, Stacey, and good morning, everyone. I'm Euan. I'm the CEO of and founder of COHESION Medical. We're a pioneering digital health solutions company based in Scotland. I don't know if you know, but Scotland's the sickest country in Europe. We have some real world healthcare challenges right on my doorstep. And my background's a bit multidisciplinary. I'm a bioengineer, system scientist, and a bit of a mathematician around computational biology. We have been running COHESION for 8 years, based in Scotland, with a focus on AI-driven condition early detection and risk. We've been applying that to a range of specialisms, from inflammatory diseases, cancers, and most recently brain health, so Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's. So we've been kind of going for 8 years. We're a small team, but we've won some big innovation awards for our technology in the UK, which has generated quite a bit of interest from life sciences. Particularly interested in how we've captured real world data and integrated it with clinical and operational data from healthcare providers. You'll probably know in the UK we have our national health system, which is effectively a cradle to grave connected healthcare and free for our public system. That's allowed us a lot of opportunities to go explore what kind of data we can capture and the AI insights that we can derive from that in terms of determining early disease inflammations right through to sort of patterns around images for dermatology right through to orthopedics. I think that probably sum things up from here.
Oh, thank you so much, Euan. And next up, we have John Harkness, or Dr. John Harkness, President and CEO of Rewire Neuro, Incorporated.
Well, thank you, Stacey. Yeah, it's wonderful to be here this morning. Thank you for everyone for coming. Rewire Neuroscience is a startup out of the Oregon Bioscience Incubator. So shout out to Portland here. It's nice to be in our hometown. We're focused on developing artificial intelligence for improving the speed, accuracy, and precision of digital pathology. We have an adaptive machine learning platform called Cytologist that provides OEM integrated cloud-based computer vision to optical microscopy products through an intuitive AI as a service model. And really we're focused on the idea that we can improve the accuracy of diagnoses by providing less bias and subjectivity to the analysis of biomedical images. And so we've been building this system for the last couple of years, really focusing on developing a better tool for research histologists to gain greater insights into the protein interactions and cell profiles that they're looking at in their research, and then applying that to the diagnostic devices that are going out into the clinic. And so we think that we have a really great platform for this. And one of the things that I think we can touch on a lot today is how that is really teaming up with the users of these AI products to build a more accurate picture of what's happening. So AI is great, people are great, but when we combine the two, we can come up with a synergized diagnosis.
Excellent. Well, thank you, John. Our third panelist is Jonathan Mathis. He's the Director in Analytics and Development of DataDx.
Hey everybody, another John. My name is John Mattis. I'm the Director of Analytics here at DataDx. My background is based in econometrics and statistical modeling, and I've been working in healthcare analytics for around the past 8 years. DataDx is a healthcare-focused analytics partner for providers of all sizes. We work particularly with different data sources available to both administrators and clinicians, and provide reports and models that help them form a more holistic view of their practice. In particular, we work to democratize artificial intelligence and other analytics best practices to ensure that everybody has a level playing field and can utilize the insights created from these tools.
Excellent, thank you. So we have just this, I'm really excited about this panel, great group of people, and I think that we'll really learn a lot today. So what I'm going to do now is put the first question in the chat, and I'll also read it. And you guys can just unmute yourselves, and hopefully this can be more of a discussion. But I will do my best to moderate. All right, so my first question is, how is adding artificial intelligence into your existing devices and processes transforming patient outcomes?
So do you want us to just go ahead and jump in?
Yes, please just jump in. And then, yeah, I just want to have it more as a conversation. but if you guys would rather, I can call on you.
No, it's okay. Here at DataDx, we help patient outcomes primarily by helping providers. So a lot of complaints that we commonly hear in the healthcare space are based on wait times, lack of quality time with your providers, and we can really drill this down as process-related issues. And it's really driven by the complexities of both providing care and maintaining a healthy business. So the first way that we kind of embed these AI processes into our systems is through an AI-driven anomaly detection system. So this is an unsupervised learning technique that allows us to kind of identify different data points that might be significantly different than other previous values. It's especially useful in combating fraud and data quality issues, which can really wreak havoc on our practice. One of the challenges that we've had with this is creating an anomaly detection system that doesn't rely on existing data labels or how they change with COVID, which we might get into a little bit later. Really, the hardest part is trying to identify a good anomaly detection system. And really the way that you can do that is just training, testing a lot of different scenarios and experimenting with the different models. So that's one big piece that we've really targeted in our AI system.
Yeah, I'd kind of echo some of John's kind of experience with our own. We found kind of the kind of first step for us was really around applying AI to operational processes in healthcare. And they were actually the easiest things to do. So you mentioned waiting lists. So whenever there was a minimum human involvement and everything was very operational in terms of resources, logistics, appointments, all that was actually quite a easy thing for us to kind of apply our AI in the first instance. There is a lot of resistance in the UK around AI, particularly with clinicians, as well as obviously patients, but clinicians were very reluctant to sort of adopt AI techniques. We used the operational optimization AI to kind of really calm nerves before we then sort of started to shift some of those AI tools onto sort of clinical decision support. I think a comment that was made earlier about, I think it was the other John, I'm getting confused which John, but about the ability to kind of combine human and machine. I think it was easier for us to go from the machine side and slowly move it into the human. So we started a lot of work on operational AI, as I said, to move into clinical AI, and we're now pushing that out into citizen AI. And when I say citizen AI, that is about putting AI assistants on devices and apps, integrating with voice activation and chatbots. And it's been a kind of slowly winning people over approach of, showing them that AI isn't a threat, but demonstrating on pain points that everyone had around administration and where there was a lot of data friction, that we could bring in some technologies that could kind of just smooth things out and slowly win people over. So I said we started operational, we now moved into clinical, and now we're moving into sort of the citizen or consumer side of things.
So I have a quick clarifying question for you. Was the buy-in, was that primarily the clinicians and the physicians, or is that the patients, or is it a mixture of both that you had to convince?
We probably made the bad mistake of going straight to the clinicians to begin with and got bounced back. I should point out this is over 20 years. So 20 years ago, we were playing with fuzzy logic and expert systems, and the clinicians didn't like that at all. So we kind of stepped back and said we moved more to the operational aspects, just to sort of show the clinicians they had nothing to fear. But actually, it's probably the consumers and patients that have been driving the adoption. And we've kind of, the clinicians are sort of the last frontier for us in terms of winning hearts and minds that AI is not a threat and actually could be quite useful. And we're building up a kind of an engagement with clinicians in Scotland around AI can actually simplify your workflows, help on the predictions, perhaps even assisting with a kind of their research. So we've brought in some like AI to help automate research. So, every kind of clinician that was just involved in routine care is now effectively got an automated research assistant. And so we've kind of like been chiseling away at the kind of like the edges of the clinicians to make them realize that AI is not a threat and is actually something that could enhance their status. But the biggest drivers in the UK at the moment are the patient cohorts and the patient charities that are pushing the patient voice. There's a lot less fear around what AI can do negatively and a lot more adoption of what AI can do positively.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. We came from really focusing on that research side of the question and convincing researchers that AI can benefit what they're doing. And that process was really a matter of looking at what automated tools can provide for optical microscopy, and then convincing people that AI is going to be doing what they train it to do, right? That AI isn't going to be coming up with its own conclusions necessarily. And so our process from that research world gave us a lot of insight into how to work in the clinical world and how to start applying our technologies. But ultimately what we are seeing is that in a lot of our histological workflows, humans are only correct about 85 to 90% of the time when they're analyzing these types of images. And so when we bring in our AI or our machine learning models, we can automate that process and really provide about the same level of accuracy. We can be between 85 and 95% accurate. And then when we combine the two, when we let a person interact with our predictive software to detect cells or look at a structure in a micrograph, we can improve that accuracy to somewhere around 99%. And so that those two working together is really where we're seeing the benefit of this technology. And I think that's kind of maybe similar to what we're seeing in a lot of areas of AI right now. That's maybe the state of the art or the state of the field. Yeah, I always like to think of driving a Tesla as a good example of how we can use AI in biomedicine right now, and in that you really don't want to take a nap while driving your Tesla. It's going to crash, but it is a fairly good assistance to have. And so when you combine your bad driving skills with your Tesla's bad driving skills, the two of you can drive quite a bit better. And I think that's the sort of application that we're seeing with our technology right now. But it's a neat distinction to have from the other two panelists here, that I think we're really focused in on that computer vision space. And one of the things that we are really focused on watching is how computer vision can be applied to a wide breadth of applications in digital pathology or in clinical medicine in general.
Yeah, I definitely agree, John. I think the key is trying to push augmented AI as much as possible. People have this idea in their head that AI is just going to come in and replace everything. And really the main thing it's trying to do is replace those easily repeatable tasks that people just do kind of automatically throughout their day, that kind of just drag down what they're doing on a repeated basis, or help to improve their predictions using something like, I'm assuming you guys are using some sort of convolutional nets. Having that augmented system really means that you can take away that boring and predictable and those jobs that humans aren't really well designed to do, and replace that with a machine that can augment the decisions that somebody's making. It really makes it for a really powerful combination of both machine and human discernment.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like we would like to augment rather than replace all these human activities. So people shouldn't be so fearful of losing their jobs, but rather doing their job better. The next question is around your concerns when you see the data coming out of healthcare. What are the disparities that you're seeing? And whoever wants to chime in first.
I think for us, it's always really around the citizen patient and the trust around data and its use. I think there's always a concern that there's data is being used maliciously or commercialized. And again, I'm talking from a UK perspective where you know, we have a slightly different perspective on healthcare than yourselves in the US. You know, 99% of our healthcare is free at the point of care, but the trust aspect is very concerning to everyone in the UK around you know, who is stewarding your data, who's selling your data, and that slightly relates to kind of you know, from a clinical clinician perspective of someone was talking to me this morning around fake AI, of whether, like, you know, there's sufficient data being generated to, you know, replicate expert insight. Just again, that might be the limitations on what data is available for training sort of networks, or indeed like the inherent biases within, like, you know, humans when they think they're an expert, but one professor who's an expert will pretty soon find an alternative professor who's also an expert and disagrees completely. So we know there are kind of like trust issues with the use of the data, but from a citizen perspective, but also from clinicians in terms of actually trusting what AI is telling them.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You know, one of the things that we like to consider is, you know, just that the error, like medical errors, are, you know, responsible for a huge number of deaths every year. I think, you know, somewhere around 200,000 deaths potentially. And, you know, that has a huge economic cost around the world, somewhere, you know, maybe around $2 billion. And I think, you know, to a large extent, the potential for AI to reduce these sorts of errors and reduce those sorts of deaths dramatically outweighs, you know, maybe the boogeyman of the malfeasance that can come from using data sources in an incorrect way. I think, you know, just as the data privacy is a huge issue with our online service providers, with, you know, what Google knows about you and Amazon, I think that's a real concern here. But you know, I think the goal for the biomedical AI industry is to provide a better service, not necessarily to mine patient data.
Yeah, I agree. I think one concern I have particularly is the distribution of these algorithms and who gets access to them and who doesn't, and the potential for increasing existing disparities. So in the US, we have the Affordable Care Act, which did decrease the gap, but there's still a substantial difference in insurance coverage and health outcomes based on race, ethnicity, gender identity, socioeconomic status. So these are things that we as an industry need to be aware of and work to improve. And if we have certain algorithms that are only available to some people, especially large organizations, that means that only patients and providers that have the ability to access those organizations will really see the benefit, which has the potential to increase this disparity pretty badly. So I think if we work to kind of democratize these algorithms, make sure that they're available for people, we really have a unique opportunity to improve healthcare across the board, because like you said, it's so powerful. It's so, once you get a good algorithm up and running, it's so easy to use the results from that to improve patient outcomes. So being able to distribute that widely, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and going off, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think John's really, you know, hit something that's important to me, which is the growing health inequalities. As I mentioned at the start, you know, Scotland's the sickest country in Europe, unfortunately. And we see the disconnect of our citizens with our healthcare. And I think one of the opportunities with having a more data-driven approach to health is the ability to connect people with technology into health, which again can drive more accuracy and replicability of like the AI patterning kind of like technology. But we have concerns that you know, there's a divide that's happening between the citizens with technology and the citizens without, and as a result, that will affect how, you know, how we train sort of our engagement AI with patients. So I think the notion that, you know, there's, you know, one algorithm that will solve everything, I think is slightly concerning.
And to follow up from these discussions, there's two questions. One is, how do we make this data more widely available or democratize this data so it's more accessible to everyone? And the other question is, how do we avoid machine bias? Because if our data is biased, then the machine will also be biased. So what are some things that we can do for both of these?
I think the first thing that I like to consider is machine bias, because that certainly is one of the issues that receives a lot of attention these days. And I think kind of at a fundamental level, we have to think about machine learning as essentially a relationship detector. We're doing a lot of correlation between variables, and one of the things that pops up when we do that is either having not enough information in our variable list, or having the wrong amount, the wrong types of information in our variable list. And so, that's where we focus a lot of our attention. Fortunately, where Rewire is focused, we're looking at computer vision, and so we're detecting patterns. But the types of patterns that we show our models are what it learns. And so, if we don't consider bringing in a wide representative sample set, then ultimately we're introducing bias there. But that's also part of what the model is trained to do. We want it to find a relationship that we might not be able to determine otherwise, that might be too complicated for a person to see. And so that inherently is a bias that the model is detecting.
Yeah, definitely. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, I was just going to say for us, it's as much about like expert bias as machine bias. I think when we've been dealing with clinicians who are predominantly focused on like systemic diseases, there's more unknowns than known, and decisions on clinical decisions is very much an individual pathway between. So again, getting back to Professor X would do one thing and Professor Y would do another. And the reason there is disparity between those decisions is around like some of the complexity of diseases. So I remember it was so much nicer to deal with a picture that didn't change than it did with dealing with a clinician who would have quite a secretive approach to how they made decisions around, or rather their understanding of what their systemic diseases were doing in terms of like patients' biology was very, very difficult to pin down. So there are kind of issues around that expert bias, and if we can kind of like constrain them to more agreement with experts, then I think machine bias is kind of like less of an issue for us.
Yeah, and I think one key that we really need to focus on is interoperability too. I mean, I think one reason why machine learning has been traditionally more concentrated recently at the larger organizations is because they have their data in a healthy warehouse that's maintained continuously. And some of the smaller organizations don't have access to that, or their data is so significantly different in some pieces that it doesn't make the models that you build on one system really easily portable to another system. You almost need to train something completely separately. So that's really important, I think, as we continue that. But in general, I mean, we can't really avoid machine bias at all. It's going to happen because we live in a biased world. If we're basing models on human activity, there's going to be human induced bias. Even medical imaging or machine tolerance predictions, there's always going to be some sort of bias, because every model is an attempt to reduce this complexity of this huge series of events into something that's understandable and predictable. So by definition, it's going to remove nuance in exchange for broad understanding, and you're going to lose some information in that. So that's going to lead to some biases. But really, it's trying to be aware of those biases, choosing appropriate learning models, using diverse training sets, making sure that you're identifying particular groups that you want to make sure you're not adding some sort of disparity to, and testing the models against them particularly is really important to just get an understanding of how your model deals with bias.
Yeah, just on the kind of like the modeling, I think that's one of the things we've seen often was, it's great trying to build in like sensitivity and specificity into your model, but actually the real question is around selectivity. Like, are you already reducing or limiting or restricting what your model can do based on the data sets that are available. So there is a bit of that Donald Rumsfeld, the known datas, you know, when in reality, you know, the real world is much larger and more full of like unknown data. And I think, you know, a lot of problems that AI has in terms of selling itself in health is it's been built on a very selective data set to begin with.
Yeah, it's like it's unintentional.
Which might work for some things, but doesn't work for like many other.
I think that's exactly right. You know, we really focus in kind of on the idea of narrow AI versus general AI. You know, I think we're really good at applying narrow AIs to solving problems right now. You know, so I guess maybe similar to how your smoke detector, you know, is detecting an alarm, it's detecting a situation. I think we can use AI as a software means to detect a certain situation that would otherwise require a person to be watching for it. And that's a great application for AI right now. It's a really easy to understand thing that we're doing. But when we have this idea of HAL, or I don't know, the Terminator, the singularity being your single point of care, you know, that's where we I think kind of go down the road of sci-fi. That's not where this technology is going to be, at least in the next couple of years.
So speaking of that, is there a danger of AI making the wrong decision?
I would say so. And I think previous comments about, you know, constraining AI to the narrowest set possible, I think is actually the right way to proceed. You know, don't take a kind of like as wide a approach as possible, and you know, break it down into distributed AI is kind of how we like to approach things, little small pockets of and then collectively looking at what the distributed AI tells us to make sort of decisions. But ultimately we still want you know, a human element when it comes to kind of a decision that's made on a particularly a clinical, and particularly involving like systemic diseases and cancers. You know, when there's you know, room for making a scheduling error around appointments, I think everyone can live through that if it sort of throws up some anomalies. But if it's down to like, you know, swapping one drug for another based on a sort of a prediction, then I think actually we still want a human element involved. And from a business sense, we also know for insurance purposes and liabilities, we still want a human to take that role rather than us as a business.
Yeah, I think that's right. One of the things that we focus on is making sure that our users understand the limitations of AI, because I think that's where problems can arise when somebody believes that, again, their Tesla is capable of driving better than it is. You know, they can put themselves in a situation where that hurts them. And I think the exact same analogy is true in medicine or in biomedical research. You know, whereas if somebody doesn't understand the limitations of the tool, then they can really put more trust into it than is appropriate. And so, you know, for determining the you know, the contents of a medical image or an MRI, you know, I think if we can use AI to improve a clinician's or a researcher's ability to see a pattern or detect an object, then that really makes the system tuned towards improving the outcome, rather than trying to replace that person, trying to replace the researcher or replace the clinician, where we're, you know, putting too much trust into an AI system that could potentially still have failures.
Yeah, and a lot of it really depends too on what the application is being used for. I mean, if you're detecting medical images or you're building a self-driving car, your level of tolerance has to be up here, right? You don't want to make any mistakes. Versus if you're building some sort of algorithm to predict which types of patients are likely to respond to a mailing campaign versus an email campaign, the cost of making a wrong decision is a little bit lower. I think it kind of goes back to you and what you were saying earlier with the difference in metrics and really understanding what's a good metric for your model and what are you trying to solve and how do you measure how effective that is. You know, if somebody's trying to sell you an AI system based on accuracy, don't take a look at it, because accuracy by and large is a pretty terrible metric for measuring the effectiveness of an algorithm. Specificity, precision, and recall are pretty important for understanding what is your model trying to accomplish and how well is it doing at accomplishing that goal.
All right, so my internet is crashing, so hopefully you guys can hear me okay. So what I'm hearing is that you have to do a lot of risk assessments to determine, you know, how much error you can tolerate. I'm wondering about accountability. Is that something that you're talking about?
I mean, it really depends on what happens. As with anything else, right? There's things that can go wrong. You can never build a system that's 100% perfect. There's unforeseen circumstances. There's particular data that you might not have trained for, and a subset or example comes up that's just totally out of left field that there's really no way that you could have predicted. And that happens with human decisions too, right? We have some specific use case that pops up that nobody could have predicted. That means everything that we've learned is wrong. So it's really understanding the type of problem that happens. And what I'm more interested in is when something like that happens, when there's an error that causes some significant discrepancy, what's the follow-up from the organization, right? What are they going to do to train their model differently? Are they going to look at a different subset of data? Are they going to try to expand what they're looking at, or be able to train against different groups? That's really what I'm looking for. How do you improve the model after it makes a mistake? Because that's the nice thing about modeling, is once you see something that it does wrong, you can help build tolerances to avoid that issue cropping up again in the future.
And then I'm wondering if there are approaches that you guys are taking to protect and secure patient data, because this has come up already in this conversation, but how do you keep the patient's data secure?
So we use in traditional, in public communications, like just encryption algorithms. We de-identify the data once it enters a sort of our models. We're quite fortunate in Scotland that we all have a single unique patient identifier across our population. That does help sort of de-identifying, personal kind of like information. It allows us to kind of do quite a lot of like data linkage that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. But from a company perspective, we took very early on a stance that we didn't actually want to own or handle any data. So we became effectively a modeling and transaction company. So we could take some of the data that depersonalize it, put it through our model, and then pass it into our health system for our providers, our clinicians to send, and researchers to sort of play around with. So in some ways, I've passed the problem to somebody else. I think actually that was the best thing for us to do.
Yeah, that's exactly the same approach that we took with our human data. We don't want to know who that is. We don't want to own any of that protected health information. I think one of the better ways for our users to use our service is really to apply our models to data sets that they have. So, after we've trained a data set, we can put it into their hands and not ever have to own the relationship with the patient data. We don't have any of that coming back to our servers. And, that's a great way to make sure that that isn't going to anyone that it doesn't need to go to.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo what you guys said. Is key is you've got to know what data you need to use and use only that. I mean, there are specific use cases where you need to know the lowest level PHI in order for a model to be effective. But if you can avoid doing that as much as possible, that makes it much safer. luckily, there's a lot of really good standards that are out there, and look at, if you're using a cloud provider, look at what standards they have and what certifications they have. There's some recommendations from the from NIST that you can follow. But yeah, look at the limitations for covered entities, business associates, and HIPAA high tech. Know which ones you fall under. And yeah, you might want to even look into relevant litigation and penalties laid down on offending parties. Just be aware of the steps you need to take to secure patient data, and make sure that you're following through with all of them.
Yeah.
Has your field been impacted by the recent pandemic?
Who has not been affected by the recent pandemic? I think there would be a very interesting edge case. We've actually found, I hate to say there's a silver lining for us around COVID. It has accelerated some of the changes that was needed in our healthcare systems in the UK. I suspect this will be the same across the world. A move towards greater real world evidence capturing, passing it into real-time remote monitoring systems. So the volume of data that we're now dealing with is really accelerated. The need for it is also really scaled, although we've had quite a broad range of from inflammatory diseases, cancer and brain health. We're now getting approaches from right across the specialties. So I think now what COVID has actually brought is a need for more data from the real world, and more automation and processing of that data, and an interpretation that's got some meaning. So I think if you are involved with health data and AI, I think actually, despite the bad side of COVID, this is a big opportunity for many companies.
Yeah, I'll echo that, and that we've really seen a transition from analytics in the healthcare space being a nice to have to really a need to have. People really need to understand their business. They need to understand how COVID has affected it, especially in these cases where we're seeing the reduction in elective procedures that are either available in facilities, or if they're shut down completely, how that affects your business, and how you can potentially deal with that situation again in the future. One thing in particular that we've been trying to deal with is when you're working on time series models, how do you alter the model to deal with data that's significantly different than data that's you historically collected, right? If you've got some sort of seasonal based trend, it's going to be very different when you're looking at something that's COVID related. So there's a couple different techniques that we've played around with. I think you can always withhold data. You can add a feature flag that lets you know this particular data set is significantly different. But really, a lot of time is spent understanding the relationship. Okay, if this is causing RVUs to increase, what's the cause behind that? So I think there's a real opportunity to understand your business, because you've got one metric that's changing significantly, and you can really try and dive in and see the drivers behind that.
Yeah, to kind of continue on that, I think one of the things that we've noticed, or to really follow up on the conversation we were having before the session started, that one silver lining of the COVID pandemic happening right now in 2020 is that we have the technological means to work around it, and that's one of the things that we've noticed in the research setting. So a lot of our biomedical researchers, who I think are a really important part of the medical system as a whole right now. I mean, we're waiting for biomedical researchers to come up with our vaccine right now. That's kind of, I think, one of the linchpins in our healthcare system. And so what we've noticed is a lot of our researchers are transitioning to remote models of work and using some of our software tools to enable that. And I have a great I just had a great conversation with one of our users down in Texas, who's a primary investigator in a research lab, and she's using our software to enable an undergraduate that she's never met to do the sort of complicated image analysis that would typically require a person with a PhD to do. And so she's offloaded this workflow to a fairly young person that she doesn't really have any ability to manage day to day, because AI tools, or our AI tool, is able to help that person through the workflow and provide a a result that the PI can trust, our customer can trust. And so that's where I think, you know, these tools are really AI is synergizing with our technology world, and in providing, you know, resources that can allow allow our medical system, allow our research system to move on, even with these challenges.
Yeah, I would probably also add, like, that we've seen quite a cultural shift happening as well. You know, we talked earlier in our conversation here that you know, there was usually a traditional resistance from clinician to AI and the use of data. Actually, we found, you know, clinicians are so exhausted with the management of COVID around their patients and their kind of their clinical needs. They're actually kind of almost going down on their knees crying out, you know, could you automate this? Could you capture this data? Can you provide this real-time analytics? Can you make their life easier? So their pain points have like hugely scaled since pre-COVID, where it was more, I like this, but I'll think about it. Maybe I'll, you know, now the urgency within the healthcare environment is so great that, you know, people who would, you know, AI is not for me, are now come in and say to us, like, you know, could you have a tool that you could just drop in to help me with this point? And I think that kind of that's a turning point for medicine, that was always very much a, you know, knowledge driven, and is always knowledge in the head of the clinician, is now actually being extracted and you know, and applied in many more ways than it was before. So as I said, we feel the opportunities are global, if you can find sort of your niche.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think it's allowing people to work harder. It's allowing people to do more than they would typically be able to do. You know, the amount of data that's coming into a clinician or even into a researcher, you know, is just growing exponentially, and providing these tools now, like you said, Euan, to, you know, at this point when I think we're ready for transition, is, you know, providing a great opportunity for us to keep up with, you know, the fire hose of data that is being pointed at us.
Yeah, I mean, there's even an opportunity, I think, for more data to come in. I mean, you've got, especially with telehealth, if that trend continues, you've got two people sitting in front of a computer screen. How do you take advantage of that? You know, how do you get more information from the patient, because they're interacting with, potentially with an application, and you can build trends, you can build models from that over time. It might, you know, you might not necessarily want to use that directly for diagnosis, you might not want to necessarily use that directly for providing care to the patient, depending on the types of questions that you're asking them. But it is a significant source of data that I think we can utilize and take advantage of if that trend continues into the future. And that kind of depends, at least in the US, on the payment system.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback here. So I'd like to now move on to questions from the audience. And I think we have some people that are really interested in talking about the data. So one of the questions is about adapting the domain adaptation problem, which John, you already talked about a little bit. What happens when you collect your training data, it's in one setting or context, and then during deployment, your data is from a different one. So how do you deal with this problem in practice? So I think you talked about a little bit, if you want to expand on that.
This John?
Yeah, this John.
It kind of depends. I mean, you can have different data sets. So you can have new types of data coming in. So if you train your data on a data set that's significantly different than the data set you're trying to build predictions on, you got to be aware there's probably going to be some issues there. Maybe it will work, but I would really just make sure that you're testing it and ensure you're getting good results out of it. I think the other probably more common issue is when models kind of get out of date because data significantly changes, probably because the process has significantly changed. Either the process of collecting data has changed, or the actual data fields that the application is using to collect data has changed significantly. So part of that is just continuing to retrain your models. With any other work process, you can't just get comfortable. You can't you can't implement a model and say, okay, it's done, and you use it forever and ever and it works perfectly for you. It's a continual process of making sure that you're building slight improvements to it, you're retraining. The best system you can set up is an online system where you actually are continually retraining as you're building predictions into the model and kind of getting this back and forth pull. And it's also knowing the longevity of the data and how useful it is for your specific use case. If your data set really requires, 10 years worth of data, then, it's something you've got to deal with. But otherwise, you might want to start eliminating data as it becomes older and less useful and focusing more on the problem and the specific data set that you're dealing with right now to ensure that you're not holding on to any old information in the model that might not be relevant to the current process.
And,
yeah, I think so. I was just going to say, I think that's right. I think that the move from like offline to online or to real-time modeling is really, well, it's an imperative now. I've always argued with my academic rivals here that who just wanted to do like offline modeling with data sets that were quite historical and usually well out of date. That actually the shift towards like real-time modeling is particularly with COVID is actually kind of essential. So I wouldn't want to go back to any kind of offline approaches now. And if you can build into kind of an adaptive model control, that actually, you've got some kind of learning of the model that actually, can grow with increasing data sets, but at the same time, also quite changing data sets. It's quite tricky to do, but it's doable.
Yeah, one of the terms I've seen pop up more and more now is this idea of ghost AIs, kind of these systems that have been forgotten and continue to live on. And I think that's exactly the risk. To echo both of your points, one of the things that we're doing every day is watching how our models are performing compared to, what some of the feedback is from our users, keeping that human in the loop AI. We have a great way to constantly test our systems, see where they're failing, see where they need to be improved, and then actually see what those improvements do. Is that making a model better, or are we moving further away from our target?
And then a related question is concerning model. What are some ways you've handled detection and correction of drifting models and data?
That's pretty similar to what we were talking about before. It's just data significantly changing over time, and how you change models to make sure that you're dealing with current situations, not previous ones. Yeah.
And so, as you guys were talking, the pandemic has accelerated, or you've discussed how it's accelerated trends in this field and these unique opportunities that you've all leveraged, and the increased demand for AI in the biomedical field. So the question is, what prevents you from truly taking advantage of these opportunities?
So if I'll go first, I think there's funding barriers. I think every company could always have more money. There's probably time barriers. You'd always want to spend more time doing what you love, as opposed to doing all the business admin that you have to do. I think there's probably still some cultural barriers between countries, which I think should really dissolve, once the world wakes up to, the pandemic has really affected everyone. So the the different models of care, whether that's like, more of a private healthcare in the US or more of a public state healthcare in the UK, actually those barriers are much more permeable. So a solution in one area should actually be a solution in another territory or another region or another model. I think it's a case of being able to sort of understand the kind of the model for doing business is unique, but actually the solution is probably quite universal. So I think there's a bit of funding, time, but also sort of learning or understanding that actually you can take these advantages of these opportunities just with a bit of learning and with a bit of connectivity. And I think, if the world wasn't small ish before with internet. I think COVID's made it even smaller.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe a 25th hour in the day would be helpful. I think that could allow us to move a little bit faster. But one of the things that is happening right now that's really encouraging is I think a national shift towards focusing on developing more of these applications. One of the things that we've seen come out of the National Science Foundation over the last year or so is a retargeting of some of their funding towards developing AI technologies, and that. I think that sort of national attention towards these tools can really help us grow faster, because ultimately, funding is what holds back innovation. We can come up with all the neat little science projects we want, but to get that to a clinician's hands is a much bigger undertaking.
Yeah, and speaking about cultural shifts too, I mean, I think it's even more than just country to country. I mean, even within individual practices and individual instances of different businesses, there's different ways of doing business. And so, especially if you're dealing with business processes, you either need to train the model separately for each different type of business, or you need to build some sort of protections for that, and really work to not only change the way that you're building predictions based on the actual model from an individual clinic, but what they do with the results from that model as well, and kind of training them to use it, kind of what we were talking about earlier, adaptively, and augment their current processes. Which is now a great opportunity, because so many processes are kind of up in the air with COVID. So good time to change.
So given all these challenges and all these opportunities, what do you see as the main priorities in the people that you work with? Like, who's going to help bring this field to the next level? What kind of technical and soft skills are you looking for?
I mean, it's a combination of it. So AI and data science field in general is kind of a mishmash of a bunch of different fields. And there used to be this kind of idea of this unicorn data scientist that would understand statistics and general mathematics and computer science. And they know all these at an expert level and can do everything themselves. And what we're really seeing now is kind of a move away from that model towards more of a data science by committee team. So you have computer science experts, you've got mathematics and statistical experts all working together to build models. It takes a little bit of time, because not only do these people have to have a technical skill, but you need to build that business knowledge as well. So you need to have people that understand what the data is being used for, how it could be different than what they immediately suspect. You've got a column that's labeled something, and in reality, it could be used for multiple different things, and really building that business understanding is really important too. So trying to hit it from those three angles, computer science, statistics or mathematics, and then that business knowledge too, all of them together, is really the approach that we've taken.
I think that's exactly right. The data scientist or statistician that I want to hire also has an understanding of the biomedical application that we're looking at, but is ultimately focused on that problem, and vice versa. The PhD or biologist that I want to hire needs to have a fundamental understanding of the software tools that we're developing, and I think that's something that we're starting to see all the time. A biologist by training who also knows how to do a little bit of coding is a really powerful person to have on your team.
Yeah, I think that the last point by John about kind of having a good tool set when it comes to your skills is quite important. As you say, having someone who can do more than one thing, a biologist who can code, or a software engineer who's understands biology. Don't think many of them exist. I think what is low on the ground is like really good mathematicians. I think we've struggled to find people that've got that like level of abstraction when it comes to kind of the maths that we use. That's a skill shortage for us, but I mean it might just be limited to Scotland. But I think also having someone with a biology background and indeed a kind of maybe in a deeper specialism like immunology, if that's your kind of area of expertise. For us, like we apply a lot of AI to sort of, as I said, inflammation and autoimmune diseases. being able to understand that from a biologist's perspective is actually really helpful in making us understand what the problems are. And probably the third thing that we also recognize is a bit of a challenge is to actually have someone who's a communicator who can actually translate all these different languages. You know, may not be a mathematician, but get some of the concepts, might not do any of the coding, but actually can explain what technology does. Might not be a data scientist, but actually can explain what that curve means or what that model does, or indeed even just having that ability to just simplify, as John said, kind of like a round table of discussion, and someone actually said, what we all mean is this. And having that person who can just pull together all those different perspectives and say, you know, like bring it down to us, you know, a very neat kernel of this is what this is all about. It's actually, they're probably the person you need most.
Excellent. Well, it looks like we are out of time. So I want to thank our panelists. This was very enlightening. And also, I really appreciate the optimism looking forward and, you know, taking advantage of the current situation. So I think it's something we all need to hear right now. So thanks again. And thank you, TAO, for hosting this event. Have a good day.
Thanks, Stacey. Thanks,
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Stacey. Have a great day.